Hi, my name is Niki. This is The Interventionalist, and I want to talk about the dehumanization of marginalized communities, but particularly the way that we can internalize that dehumanization and the way that that then affects our interpersonal relationships, like our everyday relationships, in a sense of feeling like you constantly have to overcompensate in order to like earn or be deserving of love and care from somebody, even if that person that you're in this relationship with isn't like dehumanizing you themselves, you know? And the reason that I'm thinking about that is because I was just rereading Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I believe that's the author. And every time I read that book, I'm reminded of something that like was a revelation I had the first time I read it, which was the notion that you can have a loving relationship where neither person has to like, or either person has to like go above and beyond to be worth being loved or worth being in someone's life. And the reason that I feel that way about that book is because obviously like there's a very deep love between them two, and it's like kind of they're in a war or whatever, but there is no like grand gestures or like constant gestures of like love and care through like tangible material forms of giving. And it's not that I necessarily even think that like when I say constant, like being like ever giving in relationships to earn or deserve love and affection, I guess it doesn't have to be material, but I guess like it is like kind of a tangible thing, but then also like overexerting yourself emotionally, time-wise, in order to feel like, yeah, like overcompensate in all the ways you can overcompensate. But in this book, there is just like no grand gestures. There is no like insane devotion to like constantly giving in order to be worthy of the other's care. Like they literally just are and exist as they are and love each other as they are and want the other for all that they are. And it's like they just exist within the other's space, and that is enough so long as they exist as they are. That is all that needs to be given in order to like be worthy and deserving of that love and affection that they share with each other. I really struggled with that idea, like just partially because of how I was raised. I was not really raised in a home where like that was, just wasn't raised like that, like to build that sense of self. And so that's part of the reason, like I've always kind of assumed that that was the reason that I struggled for a long time with feeling like that. I like could like be worth loving if somebody told me that they loved me, like, and cared about me without like having to like work so hard to have that worth. Like maybe I could just have it, you know, as I am, existing as I am, the way that I felt about them, like in the people that I love, like I love them and I recognize all their worth and value just as they are, you know, not based on what they are constantly giving or can be giving, you know? And I always kind of attributed it to like, I guess like trauma growing up or like just like attachment issues, whatever. And I think this all plays in, but I never really considered the impact of like dehumanizing like systems. I guess I don't know why I just never really think about it. Like I never really consider the way that misogyny and the patriarchy like that quite literally is inherently dehumanizing. Homophobia, those are all like inherently dehumanizing things that like essentially take away a piece of your humanity because the world doesn't recognize it as like the normal human thing to do. So therefore it's like not, it's like an abnormal, like unwanted like aspect of humanity. So then it's like dehumanized. And for women, like in the patriarchy, we're dehumanized because we're commodified and objectified and like hypersexualized. There's all these different ways that we're turned into like objects and thus dehumanized, because if you're an object, you're not even considered like a human thing, right? And I feel like it just like had me considering the ways, I guess, that so many of us, I feel like, who are in any form of a marginalized community, obviously there's varying degrees depending on like your life experience and the marginalized community or communities you're a part of. But I feel like so many of us experience something similar, which is this like inner knowing, like you just know that there's something not right about you and that you're missing something. It's like there is a lack inside of you, and whatever that lack is, like, is keeping you from being, like, right. Does that make sense? I feel like a good way to put it, so I've been reading a lot this week because of that. And I feel like a good way to sum it up are between two things that I was reading, which I was reading a lot of essays from Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, which is amazing. The essays are incredible. I really recommend it. And then also I was reading Stone Butch Blues, which I'm going to make a video later this week about like the concept of gender outside of the patriarchy. But both of these things, like there was a couple quotes in particular in the ones I was reading that I'm like, oh, this like perfectly like exemplifies that idea. Like that we just feel like there's something lacking. And so for Audre Lorde it says, what is it? Audre Lorde in the essay Eye to Eye, Black Women, Hatred, and Anger, there's this quote and it says, children know only themselves as reasons for the happenings in their lives. So of course, as a child, I decided there must be something terribly wrong with me that inspired such contempt. So obviously this is like a very hyper-specific experience, and also receiving like that dehumanization from the world around you because of the fact that you're in a marginalized community or you have marginalized identities. And it's the concept of like as a child just knowing that there's like something wrong with you, and that must be the reason because there's something wrong with you, right? And I feel like a lot of like women, if you're raised as a woman, there is like inherently that sense like there's something about you that makes you not completely right, because if you were completely right, you would be believed to be capable of the same things as your male counterparts. But we're pretty much taught really early on that we should not assume that we are capable of the same things. We're lacking in some way. And then there's another quote from Stone Butch Blues, which is an autobiography from Leslie Feinberg. Let me make sure it's really good. And in this one, I also think really speaks to it, which is, and also Leslie Feinberg's, this is about like obviously the experience of being a butch, which is like a lesbian, queer experience. Okay. I didn't want to be different. I longed to be everything grown-ups wanted so they would love me. I followed all their rules, tried my best to please, but there was something about me that made them knit their eyebrows and frown. No one ever offered a name for what was wrong with me. That's what made me afraid it was really bad. I only came to recognize its melody through this constant refrain, is that a boy or a girl? So that's like the experience from like a queer experience, a lesbian experience, or like just like a young child not fitting within like the norm or what is determined to be the norm, and being able and like knowing it, whether or not those words are like directly spoken to you, you know that there's something about you that like you need to like now make up for, that you're lacking, that is not making you as equal in whatever way. And there's also like there's a lot of quotes in various different essays that I think were like really spoke to this idea in Audre Lorde's essays. But there's two quotes that I think like speak to this. And one is from an interview with Audre Lorde and Adrienne Rich, which is in that collection of essays. And it says, you have to pick up things non-verbally because people will never tell you what you're supposed to know. You have to get it for yourself. That is what you need in order to survive. I feel like that is also so telling. Like you know there's something wrong with you, and you organize your life around the fact that there is something missing, or there's something not right about you, or there's something about you that like is like an inherent limitation to you that makes you like inherently lacking in comparison to like your counterparts for whatever way, for like women to your male counterparts. And you just have to keep that knowledge with you as you move through the world in order to like protect yourself, or like find a way to exist in the world that like you can still have value and like opportunity and like be loved and like cared for. And so you're just like hyper aware of this fact. And there's also another quote that was just like in the essay Poetry is Not a Luxury by Audre Lorde, and it says knowledge births precedes, in parentheses, understanding. And I feel like that also like really sums this up, because it's like the concept of like, I know that there is something wrong, but I don't understand why. Like I don't understand why what I am is there is something missing about me, or there's something not right about me, you know, especially when you're a child. Like you have no idea other than what you are. You have no idea. You don't understand, but you know that there's something all around you that you feel like everyone else can see, but you don't know, or you don't completely understand it. You just know that that's there, or there's a lack of something that should be there. And anyway, so I was just thinking about that, like inherent lack, and then how that would come up in like my personal relationships and like people that my like closest friends, like this like feeling like you inherently lack something. And so when you're in a relationship with somebody, you have to try really hard to like overcompensate for what you believe that you lack, because you don't see yourself as a whole person. And then I'm thinking about like, okay, like the patriarchy, like if you, any marginalized community, literally, I was just thinking about womanhood, which is why I thinking about the patriarchy, but in any marginalized community where like you are literally being deemed unequal in some capacity, how could you see yourself as like a whole person? Because if you're not being considered equal, you're obviously not considered as whole, right? Like there is no like, you're not the equivalent of each other. But if you're not equal, then I feel like it's really difficult to be in a relationship with another person or interact with the world that is like systemically enforcing that idea that you are not equal. How can you interact with anything in the world and not feel like you need to make up for the thing that does not make you equal in order to have any worth or value? Like, how do you not inherently go into anything, including your interpersonal relationships, like any kind of relationships, your friendships, your romantic relationships, and then feel like you need to work extra hard, not even maybe necessarily to be seen as equal, but to like have enough to be worth offering or like to have enough to give. Does that make sense? Like if somebody else is more than you, they don't have to work harder to like give to you because they already have it all. But for you, if you're like unequal and you don't have the same amount as them, you have to work extra hard to like try and pull shit together to then have the same amount in order to give to them. But in reality, like all you're giving is just like your two existences. That's like why it reminds me of Song of Achilles. But like when you feel like you're lacking because you're not equal, you have to work extra hard to find a way to make up for that lack and then like show them that you've made up for it in like all these different ways in order to like justify them caring about you or give them a justification. And essentially, so I was thinking about that, whatever. I was thinking about it in terms of like interpersonal relationships. And then I decided to do some research on just like the concept of dehumanization in general. And so I read some different research articles like just related to this concept, dehumanization. And so here's a quote from one, which says, put simply, dehumanization refers to the perception or treatment of another person as lacking human qualities, which is like pretty much given. And then here's another quote in the same article about it. Dehumanization is defined as perceiving an individual or group as lacking qualities that are uniquely or essentially human, qualities that separate humans from non-human entities such as animals or inanimate objects. Example, robots, machines, that's what it says. And this had me thinking about, okay, well then define human. Like who is defining human? Like for the word dehumanization to even exist, like within like a systemic, social, and like cultural regard, somebody is defining human, right? And like who is defining human? Who are the people always in power? Cis, straight, white men. And so I think like what it's kind of, I don't know, I was just thinking about the way that like every marginalized community, their humanity, their humanization is dependent on how close they are to this ideal human, which is a cis straight white man, because they are what they believe to be human. So in every way that you differ from like a cis straight white man, you're like knocked down in your humanness. And we know this, like literally this has quite literally been written into law, like the 3/5 compromise. I believe it's the 3/5 compromise in the United States related to race. And like this has like been a thing, right? Like that's quite literally how it works. Like if the farther you are from that ideal human, the less value you have and the less human you are. And the idea of like there being a perfect human, like the person that is like the most human, like a cis straight white man, literally reminds me of, it made me think of Plato's Forms. And essentially that's just the idea that like there is a perfect version of everything in the world, and then everything else is just images that are like replicas, but they're imperfect because like nothing can like perfectly replicate like this perfect thing that like we never actually have access to. Like an example, like when you learn about this is like shadows in a cave, and on the cave, like the people inside the cave can see the shadows, and like the shadows are replicas of what's happening outside, and outside would be like the forms, but everything else is just shadows, or you see the shadows, you don't see the actual thing, the perfect actual thing. I don't know, it just reminded me of this, like the idea that like, okay, so then there is a perfect human and everyone else is considered a replica, and essentially unless you are that same exact thing, every way in which you differ or you vary and you are other, you're defective. And then it like knocks down your worth or value or capacity to be a human. And so I think we pick up on that pretty early on, like going back to the quotes that were by Audre Lorde and Leslie Feinberg, like we pick up on that even if it hasn't been directly said to us, like because you are not this perfect form, this ideal like person, this like human, this is straight white man, you're less than, or you're less human, or you have less value, or you're like not equal, even if that's not like directly said to us, like you pick up on it. And oftentimes I think it's because like, whether it's through microaggressions, like depending on like your specific circumstance, the kind of marginalization that you experience, you're being like actively dehumanized. And like whether it's like an interpersonal like microaggressions or like on a literal system level, like it becomes pretty clear that you are not someone considered equal to those around you, or to like your like the perfect counterpart, like the cis straight white man, and therefore inferior. And so then like how do you not sort of like always have that in your mind? How are you then not like constantly sort of how are not like all of your decisions and like actions and like sense of self like in some way or another impacted by this like constant knowing that you are lacking something, and that thing that you are lacking like is affecting every single way in which you move through the world. Like you can't, like it affects every single way that you move through the world, and every single experience that you have with the world is impacted by the way that the world, or the world that you are in, like the bubble of the world that you are in, believes you, like it's impacted by what that world believes you to be, like the value that you have, you know? And so there is no way to not think about it all the time, or for it to not, like that dehumanization to not be something that like you are constantly aware of, because you like are within a system that's like perpetuating that dehumanization to whatever extent. But then in addition, like I think like we internalize it, and even when we're not in like an interpersonal situation where that person is dehumanizing us, like maybe somebody who's a part of our own community who also is experiencing that marginalization, and they're just like genuinely like a good person, because like people can like be terrible to each other even if they're like in the same marginalized community. I feel like it can be hard to still feel, even if they're not dehumanizing you, and like you know that like from like the outside perspective, like what we now know is like systemic dehumanization, and even just like general dehumanization that can occur like in interpersonal situations like that are really, that's like very loud and evident. I think it can still be hard to then have relationships where that like internalized dehumanization doesn't still exist, and then still feel like you have something lacking that you need to overcompensate to make up for, you know? Like how I think it's really hard to just like set that aside in even safe situations with people that like are not dehumanizing you, and just like believe that you are now not lacking in anything, right? Like I feel like it's really hard to put aside the thing that like has defined every aspect of your life within the world. And so then I was just like, I don't know, I guess I just never considered the way that like my interpersonal relationships, the issues that I have, that like when you go to therapy, like, oh, well, your parent like did this, so you're like this, or like you struggle with this, whatever. I just like haven't considered so much why the way that I feel like there's something like I'm missing something that makes me like I need to work really hard to like overcompensate for, or like hide the fact that I suck, or I'm missing something. I need to like work really hard to hide that I like don't have any worth. That's like something I've talked about in therapy. Like I don't feel that way anymore. I used to really feel this way, like feeling like I had to work really hard to hide the fact that if like I didn't have any worth, and if I didn't like work really hard to hide it, they would like see it and figure it out. Even in relationships with people that like were very kind to me and like I cared a lot about, and that were not treating me in any way that would I guess like reinforce that idea. But I still felt that way, you know, like I still felt that way. And I do think that like, yeah, it's a side effect of like your genuine, like general interpersonal relationships, like growing up. But I also feel like it's like consistently like affected and perpetuated by the way that like I'm just very aware that like in the general world, there are aspects of my identity that are not seen as enough, that they're missing something. And the thing that they're missing is like whatever it is that would make me a white straight cis man, you know? Like that's not like the way I think my brain is like wording it, but essentially it is like I'm missing those qualities, and therefore I'm not as human, and therefore I need to like make up for it in some capacity. But it's just that like ever present knowing, like internalized understanding, or like knowing that you are lacking something that has made you unequal, or like objectified, or like an object of or yeah, like some form, like objectified in society, like in whatever way that you experience that like marginalization. I don't know. How can you ever like put it aside, even in your interpersonal relationships? Like, I feel like it translates into every single thing that you experience. And like, it's just like genuinely really fucked up, I guess, the way that I'm thinking about how these things that we can't escape in the world, like when we walk through the world, that even when we have like behind closed doors with people that we love and care about and that care and love about us, that still is pervasive and affects the way that we feel like we are deserving or worthy of love, or like don't have to work so hard just to earn or like have enough value or worth to be loved. You know, I just like don't really consider, I guess, the systemic impact that follows you everywhere, you know, because it shapes you as a person, and then therefore, like, because of the way that it impacts and shapes you, it follows you. And I was just like thinking about that. And then I was reading, there was something I read, it was called Neither Man Nor Beast, Dehumanization and Direct and Systemic Violence. And this is like really interesting. I guess I won't really go into it, but it talks more about like the history, like particularly with the Holocaust and the dehumanization that took place there, and like the dehumanizing propaganda. And I think that's something that exists everywhere. Like for some communities, the dehumanizing propaganda is like so much more significant and severe. And then in other ways, like it's not as loud, the dehumanizing propaganda. Like currently, if I would like liken it to the United States, I would say like the dehumanizing propaganda towards undocumented immigrants has become like astounding, like so disturbingly, like just so disturbing and like astoundingly disturbing. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It just like skyrocketed with this terrible fucking person in office. And then in comparison, or like, and then dehumanizing propaganda for trans people also skyrocketed. And then I would say the dehumanizing propaganda for like women in comparison is lower right now. It's not as loud. It's still loud because there's so much that is being done also, like in regards to like taking away women's rights and like seeing them as like equal human beings. But I feel like when you look at the news and stuff, like the thing that's always on the headlines is like these like really dehumanizing headlines regarding like undocumented immigrants or trans people and transphobia. Like the dehumanizing propaganda is like exploded. That's the word. It's like been explosive recently. And in this article, it's just like essentially talking about like the use of the dehumanizing propaganda. But like, I guess something that I found interesting, like in relation to like what's happening currently, like within the world and what's happened in the world, like the difference between dehumanizing propaganda being used as like a way to sort of just stereotype or necessarily objectify versus like encourage violence and abuse was like the addition of like negative, like making sure that the dehumanizing propaganda was associated with like very negative connotations. So like, for example, both articles I read like related to this like mentioned this exact thing. One was about like linguistics related to dehumanization, and then this is about like dehumanization propaganda, right? Both mentioned the use of the word vermin as a way to describe the dehumanized population, the population that is aiming, like the government's aiming to dehumanize. And the reason that they use it in particular is because like vermin are seen as a threat to human health. And so therefore, not only are you dehumanizing them by like taking away their human qualities, you're also associating them with something that like is a threat to human health and therefore worthy of being exterminated. So then like justifies immediate violence and abuse in order to protect, right? Like in this, it talks about like how that like creates the idea, like especially related to a nation, that you need to like immediately act in order to protect yourself, even though that's just like obviously not true. It's just like fucked up, disgusting propaganda. There is a line in one of those articles, that the linguistic one, that says like why this metaphor, the vermin metaphor, is so powerful. And it says, the vermin metaphor is particularly powerful because it conceptualizes the target group as engaged in threatening behavior, but devoid of thought or emotional desire. And I feel like that occurs like in like those like that like theme occurs in all dehumanization, right? Like with say like women, the objectification of women, like we're sort of, our like agency or like our subjectivity is denied, and then we seem like devoid of like an internal subjective experience. And by taking that away from us, like we're not seen as like people with like an equally like expansive or like complex or an internal world, and therefore like not as full or like whole human beings. But in this case, right, like it's turned into something like very, very, very dangerous. And that's like why that metaphor is used, right? Like the metaphor to like dehumanize someone into something that would be like necessary to exterminate. And there's another line within that same article that says, it's like end of a sentence. It says the violent chemotherapy of a cancerous tumor in the heart of Europe. Obviously it's talking about, because this is referencing the Holocaust, it's talking about Jewish people and like the concept of them, literally a Holocaust, a genocide is a chemotherapy of a cancerous tumor. And I feel like that can be applied to so many things, like in relation to like what is being considered the cancerous tumor, right? Like any like in the world, like any marginalized identity like is then considered like the marginalized, or not the marginalized, the cancerous tumor. But then I was also thinking about like abusive relationships, and I was thinking about the way that like with women in particular, in abusive relationships, or even like through like an abusive misogynistic system, the cancerous tumor is like women having equal like rights, having like equal access to like education, having like equal like voice in matters, equal representation. Like what is determined the cancerous tumor is dependent on, I think, the agenda of like the class that is determining this stuff, and also the marginalized community itself. But all remains the same, that it is used to continuously maintain control over and take away the value, worth, and right of a person to exist as they are, you know? That's like what dehumanization is. It also brings up the concept of counterfeit humans, which reminds me again of like, what are all of us, if not cis straight white men, counterfeit humans? Like that's like the kind of thinking, like we're not completely human, like an almost uncanny valley because we're not the perfect thing. I feel like that kind of speaks to that same idea, like who's defined human, and if you're not that perfect definition, then you're not a whole human, you know? Anyways, that's going a bit more like into the history, obviously. But again, originally, like I was just thinking about this because of the way that in everyday relationships with people that like love and care about us, if we've experienced this, like being the counterfeit human, I think that it can be hard, even in like a situation with somebody who is obviously not seeing you that way or treating you that way, to like then not feel that way about yourself and not act in a manner that like is a result of that, or essentially like acting in regard to that, like acting with that idea, like as if it is true, like you are missing something about you, you know? Like being able to like set that aside seems like kind of impossible, even in like rooms with the right people who like love and care about you. And it just seems so unfair and fucked up. And I was just thinking about it. That's really like all there is to it. Like I was just thinking about this, and it was really when I was reading Stone Butch Blues that like really made me think about it, just because the way of like knowing that there was something wrong with you, and like not knowing what it is, and then knowing that you're like also lacking something, and it's the stuff that would make you right, that would like bring you closer to being this like ideal form of a human, if we're gonna use like Plato's forms to like define it. And also knowing that you can't do anything about it, right? Like you have to like continue to exist within that system, and like the abuse that it hurls at you with its systemic dehumanization, and also in like interpersonal relationships, then like the dehumanization that can occur as like a side effect of that seeping into like interpersonal relationships in general, because people like are like socialized into a culture where like this is the culture, right? So it affects like all of our relationships, but even affecting the relationships that are with people who are not dehumanizing you, you know, like holding on to that like dehumanization because it's been so internalized. I guess it just like put into perspective for me the way that there's so many things that affect like the way we develop like a sense of self-worth and self-esteem and how we act in relationships. And I always knew, obviously, like our experience in the world on a system level, like the way that we interact with the system. And I always knew, obviously, that all of that stuff impacts us. I guess I just never really thought how much that contributed to my low, in the past, my low sense of self-worth in relationships, feeling like I was lacking something and I had to make up for it. And I feel like it's just something so many of us carry when you're in a marginalized community and you're raised with the knowing, even if it's never said to you, that you are lacking something, and it is the traits that would make you this perfect form of a person, which is just a straight white man. I don't know. I'm just thinking about it. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. I don't know. I guess that's it. I think, obviously, this is an incredibly fucked up, disturbing thing that's been happening for millenniums to so many different communities of people. And it's so... it's so fucking ironic the way that it's like dehumanization, right? Like the people who are in power to impose these dehumanizing systems are apparently the people with like the most humanity. Like that would be the, right? Like that would then be, as a side effect, the truth. They would be the ones with like the most humanity, the most human. But they're imposing a dehumanizing system, like to me, is just... like literally the personification of their own lack of humanity. Like to impose a dehumanizing system, there must be something inside of you that is lacking in humanity in order to impose such a thing, Like that is what that says to me. If you have to like dehumanize other people in order to feel human, you already don't feel human. There's something about you that does not feel human enough. To like equate it to something trivial, I guess it would be like, if you have to bring down other people to feel good, then you don't feel good, right? Like that's just so fucking ironic to me. Like if you have to dehumanize others, you inherently have an aspect of yourself that is like lacking in humanity, because that is not a manifestation of humanity or like whole pure humanity. That's like a mutilation. That should be like fucking evolved out. Like that is, I don't know. I don't know. I guess I don't really have much else to say other than like, I don't know. The things that like have made me feel the most human are also the things that are like in comparison to this like perfect, apparently this perfect human. Those are the things that have made me feel the most human. Like my ability to love other women, like as a lesbian, those are like some of the experiences in my life that have made me feel the most human, like those experiences of love and intimacy. I've never felt more human, and like my humanity has like never felt more whole, or like my connection, as like a woman in society to other women, that also like that shared connection like has never made me feel like more whole. Like these are the things that I feel like really have defined the experience of humanity for me. And like what it means to be human, and it's that connection that is shared in these such like beautiful, like intimate communities. That is like where humanity lives, in that like interconnectedness that is shared amongst your experiences. And to say that those are the things that then make you less than human seems pretty ironic then, if those are the things that I think many of us feel make us the most human, or make us feel the most human. Yeah. Or like interacting with the queer community in general. Like I never feel like more like fulfilled in my humanity, like my sense of self. Like there is a cup inside of you that like can feel fulfilled in like being a human. It would be like being around other women, other queer people, other lesbians. Yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm just thinking about that. Like where they say that our humanity fails is where I feel it the most. So they can fuck off. But okay. Yeah, I guess that's it. The world is a very, very dark place, especially recently, but there is a lot of like love and hope and humanity within these communities that are constantly trying to have it stolen from them, And I guess like I just don't want to like end this making it sound like there is like it's just like all darkness like going forward. Like there still is like humanity and hope that lives within these things that is like beautiful and wonderful and inherently healing. In these dehumanizing people and these people that participate in these dehumanizing cultures or practices or microaggressions, they'll never experience that feeling, that like very fulfilling, like whole, pure sense of connection and like humanness, like personhood that people who do not dehumanize others feel. They'll never get to experience that. They'll never get to experience the purity of that humanity. And that is their punishment in life, because that sucks. because I would say that it's like the best part of existing. So yeah, I guess that's really it. Okay, so I guess I'll like end it here. I'll say that I'm posting another video this week about like gender outside of the patriarchy, or like the concept of gender outside of the patriarchy, kind of like the idea of lesbianism as a gender. And I make videos on like TikTok and Instagram if you want to watch them there, like usually like 10-minute videos sometimes. It'll all be like down below. And I also have a website where I write, and that'll also be down below. And I have a submissions page on there. So if you ever like have anything you want to say, like any thoughts on this, like on literally anything, like whether it's related to this or anything else, or just like something you want to talk about and you need a reason to talk about it, like please feel free like to send it to me. I would genuinely love to read it. I would be honored to read it. Like I've recently gotten messages like related to the past couple of videos I posted, and I feel so honored to get to read people's experiences, and also it impacts me. Like I cannot say like enough like the impact it has on me to like also just know that I'm not alone. So if you've sent me a message, I'm very thankful. Thank you. And yeah, so my email is down there if you do want to send something, you want to share any of your thoughts on anything, and if you would like to have it put online, I can put it online anonymously or not, or you can just send it to me and have that reason to talk about it. And yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I guess that's really it. Okay. Yeah, that's it. All right. Thank you for watching. Bye.